Let's imagine the UK has already left the European Union. How do you map out Scotland's path back into the bloc?
Well, some of the detail of that, of course, depends on what the final outcome for the UK is. And in the absence of knowing that, some of this discussion becomes quite speculative and hypothetical. But whatever that path turns out to be, and I'm not trying to suggest that there will be no tough discussions to have there, and Scotland will require, like all member states do, to demonstrate that it's willing not just to take the benefits of EU membership, but live up to the responsibilities as well. But I think that path back, I think it is inconceivable that that path doesn't end with Scotland being warmly welcomed as an independent member. Live up to the responsibilities as well, but live up to the responsibilities as well.
Rather evident from where I'm sat that the majority of the things the European Union plan to do in the next 10 years or so is live up to their goals, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, the targets that need to be met before 2030, when all power becomes centralised to the UN. But of course, one of the fundamental responsibilities that European member states must live up to is, of course, their humanitarian duties. And it just so happens that Scotland's in desperate need of having immigration controls. And of course, that coincides just perfectly with Sturgeon and the UN goal that she's taken specific pride in: reduced inequalities, that on the surface may just sound as if more of the same regarding representation and feminism and so on. But in and around the goals, the targets even, the facilitation of orderly, safe and regular, and of course responsible migration, the mobility of people, including for the implementation of planned and well-managed migration policies, to do one of two things: help to reduce inequalities in native countries, and of course repopulate Scotland. As it just so happens, we have an ageing population with no babies being born, record low levels.
Of GPs per head of the population than anywhere else in the UK here in Scotland, but still we've got about 100,000 people over the course of the last 5 or 6 years have had to move to find a GP. How do we answer that question?
I think it's really difficult because we don't have in Scotland, despite having control of the National Health Service, we don't have control of all the levers. We're not an independent country. So we don't have control over immigration. And we cannot have an immigration policy that works for us. And there's a number of issues about the immigration policy that there are currently.
We need to train more people and we need to import people.
Parliaments can play a key role in advancing the agenda by developing preventative anti-corruption legislation, promoting universal ratification of the Paris Agreement, and ensuring that CO2 reduction goals are met, modernising the legal framework to facilitate technological advances to mitigate global warming, harmonising laws for migration, whilst promoting the integration of migrants. When it comes to migration, climate change, sustainable development and combating corruption, the challenges that we face is not a lack of international cooperation but a lack of political will. There is no shortage of multilateral agreements that have not been negotiated by global leaders at the highest level and signed by governments, solemnly acknowledging their obligations to take specific actions in order to meet economic and good governance goals. In 2003, the UN adopted the Convention Against Corruption, which requires state parties to implement measures related to prevention, law enforcement and information exchange. More recently, the international community has adopted agreements on refugees and migrants as well as climate change. National parliaments should push for compliance with the UN's Global Goal for Migration and Global Compact on Refugees, and must accelerate implementation ahead of the UN's Climate Action Summit. If countries of the world acted in good faith to implement the commitments, we would all be much better off. We could have a rational and fair approach to migration that prioritises human rights and considers the unique needs of the countries of origin, transit and destination, ensuring the necessary action is taken to meet the challenge of climate change, which threatens us all with extreme weather and rising sea levels, and to tackle poverty, corruption and crime. We are trying to play our part in developing legislative responses and promoting regional cooperation based on the principles of the OSCE, Principles outlined in the OSCE's founding document, Helsinki Final Act, recognise the efforts to develop cooperation in the fields of trade, industry, science and technology. As I said, Sturgeon has taken goal number 10 of the UN Sustainable Goals, reduced inequalities and made it our own. And within that, the targets, it specifically says that there is a need to facilitate regular and responsible migration, including for the implementation of planned and well-managed migration policies. Also says that by 2030 there should be a reduction to less than 3% the transaction costs of migration remittances and eliminate remittance corridors with costs higher than 5%. Now, all the talk of free movement of people being required from the European Union to rectify the ageing populace problem that Scotland currently faces. A few things to take into consideration. First and foremost, all the years they've had to render the problem, never done a thing. Second of all, the majority of countries within the European Union face the same problem, coincidentally. One does have to wonder. So when the time comes, they're all going to have to follow the same mantra.